The morning sun cast long shadows across the military shooting range as Captain Sarah Mitchell carefully unpacked her gear. Her hands moved with practiced precision, removing each item from the foam-lined case. When she pulled out her customized rifle, several nearby soldiers stopped what they were doing to stare. The weapon looked different from the standard-issue firearms everyone else carried. Sarah had spent countless hours modifying it, adjusting the grip, changing the stock, and adding specialized sights that suited her unique shooting style. Every modification had a purpose, born from years of experience and understanding of her own abilities. Lieutenant James Parker was the first to notice. He nudged his companion, Sergeant Mike Torres, and pointed toward Sarah's rifle. Within moments, a small group had gathered at a respectful distance, whispering among themselves. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. "Would you look at that?" Parker said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Someone's been playing with their weapon like it's a toy." Torres chuckled, crossing his arms over his chest. "Probably thinks all those fancy modifications will make up for poor training. I've seen this before. People spend more time customizing than actually practicing." Sarah heard every word, but she didn't react. She had encountered this attitude before, more times than she could count. In her 15 years of military service, she had learned that action spoke louder than arguments. She continued her preparation, checking each component of her rifle with the same careful attention she always gave. More soldiers began to gather as word spread about the unusual weapon. Some were genuinely curious, wanting to understand the modifications. Others came simply to watch what they assumed would be an embarrassing display of overconfidence. The shooting range, which had been relatively quiet minutes before, now buzzed with conversation and speculation. "I heard she thinks she's some kind of expert," another voice added to the growing commentary. "Probably read a few articles online and decided she knew better than the people who designed these weapons." Private First Class Danny Chen, fresh out of basic training, looked uncertain. He had only been at the base for 3 weeks and didn't know any of the people involved. "Maybe she knows what she's doing," he suggested quietly to the soldier beside him. The older soldier, a veteran of multiple deployments, shook his head. "Kid, I've been doing this for 12 years. Standard-issue weapons are standard for a reason. They're tested, reliable, and proven in combat. All these custom jobs are just ego trips." Sarah finished her preparation and stood up, her rifle held comfortably in her hands. She walked toward the firing line, her boots crunching on the gravel path. The crowd parted slightly to let her through, their eyes following her every movement. She could feel their judgment, their assumptions about who she was and what she was capable of. At the firing line, she took her position at lane 7, placing her rifle on the bench in front of her. The rangemaster, a grizzled sergeant with 25 years of experience, approached with a clipboard. He glanced at her weapon, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He had learned long ago not to judge a soldier by their equipment. "Captain Mitchell, you're cleared for qualifications," he said, his voice neutral and professional. "Standard course, 40 rounds, time segments. You know the drill." Sarah nodded, putting on her hearing protection and safety glasses. Behind her, the crowd had grown larger. At least 30 soldiers now stood watching, waiting to see what would happen. Some had their phones out, ready to record what they expected would be either a spectacular failure or, at best, an average performance that would prove their point about unnecessary modifications. Parker leaned against a post, smirking. "This should be good," he muttered to Torres. "I give her maybe 60% accuracy tops. That rifle looks like it was put together by someone who learned gunsmithing from YouTube videos." The rangemaster raised his hand, preparing to signal the start of the qualification course. Sarah took a deep breath, settling into her stance. Her modified grip felt perfect in her hands. The custom stock aligned perfectly with her shoulder. The specialized sights gave her a clear view of the target's downrange. Everything else faded away. The whispers, the doubts, the mocking comments all became background noise. Sarah had been in high-pressure situations before, moments where lives depended on her accuracy and speed. A qualification course with a crowd of skeptics was nothing compared to actual combat. The rangemaster's hand dropped, and the timer started. Sarah's first shot rang out across the range, the sound echoing off the nearby hills. The target 100 yards away showed a perfect center hit. She smoothly transitioned to the next target, her movements fluid and confident. Behind her, some of the chatter died down. A few soldiers exchanged glances, surprised by the precision of that first shot. But many remained unconvinced, writing it off as beginner's luck or assuming she would falter as the course continued. Sarah continued firing, moving through the qualification course with steady rhythm. Each shot was deliberate, controlled, and precisely aimed. Her breathing remained calm, her hands steady. The customized rifle, which had drawn so much mockery, performed exactly as she had designed it to perform. The crowd watched in growing silence as target after target showed center mass hits. What had started as entertainment, a chance to see someone taken down a notch, was becoming something else entirely. Uncertainty crept into the expressions of those who had been most vocal in their criticism. Parker's smirk had faded. Torres had uncrossed his arms and was now watching with focused attention. Even the veteran who had dismissed custom weapons to Private Chen was now studying Sarah's technique with a more analytical eye. The range master watched through his binoculars, tracking each shot's placement. His expression remained neutral, but there was a glint of something in his eye. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of genuine skill when he saw it. Sarah moved into the timed, rapid-fire segment of the qualification course. This was where most soldiers showed their weaknesses, where adrenaline and pressure caused their accuracy to drop significantly. The targets appeared at varying distances, requiring quick adjustments and split-second decisions. Her modified rifle responded to every input with precision. The custom trigger she had installed required exactly the amount of pressure she preferred, preventing any jerky movements that might throw off her aim. The specialized sights, which had drawn particular mockery from Lieutenant Parker, allowed her to acquire targets faster than standard iron sights ever could. Shot after shot found their marks. The rhythm of her firing was almost musical, a steady cadence that spoke of countless hours of practice and intimate familiarity with her weapon. She wasn't just shooting, she was demonstrating a level of mastery that came from treating her rifle not as a tool, but as an extension of herself. Private Chen moved closer to get a better view, his earlier uncertainty replaced by obvious fascination. He watched how Sarah positioned her body, how she controlled her breathing between shots, how she transitioned smoothly from one target to the next without wasted motion. "She's really good," he whispered to no one in particular. The veteran soldier beside him nodded slowly, his earlier dismissiveness gone. "Yeah, kid, she really is." As Sarah continued through the course, more soldiers arrived, drawn by word spreading through the base. Among them was Major Thompson, the base's training officer, who had heard about the commotion at the range. He stood at the back of the crowd, arms folded, watching with the practiced eye of someone who had evaluated thousands of soldiers over his career. Parker noticed the major's arrival and felt a twinge of nervousness. He had been pretty vocal in his mockery, and now he wondered if that had been wise. But he pushed the feeling aside, still clinging to his original assessment. So she was having a good run. Anyone could get lucky for a few minutes. The course moved into long-distance precision shooting. Targets appeared at 300 yards, then 400, then 500. At these distances, even the slightest error in technique or equipment could send rounds completely off target. Wind, breathing, trigger control, and weapon stability all became critically important factors. Sarah adjusted her position, settling into a prone stance for the long-distance portion. Her modified stock, which had been specifically adjusted for her frame and shooting style, provided perfect stability. She took a moment to read the wind, noting the slight breeze coming from the east. Her calculations were quick but thorough, born from years of experience in various conditions. The first long-distance shot cracked through the air. 5 seconds later, the rangemaster's spotting scope confirmed a direct hit on the center mass of the 500-yard target. The second shot followed, then the third. Each one found its mark with mechanical precision. Sergeant Torres rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of discomfort. He had been particularly harsh in his earlier comments, and now those words felt hollow and foolish. The woman wasn't just competent. She was operating at a level that most soldiers never reached, regardless of how much training they received. "Maybe those modifications aren't just for show," he admitted quietly to Parker. Parker didn't respond. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on Sarah's performance. He had built his reputation on being one of the better marksmen in his unit, and watching someone exceed his abilities with a weapon he had mocked was a bitter pill to swallow. Sarah completed the long-distance segment and moved to the final portion of the qualification: rapid target engagement with multiple moving targets. This was considered the most challenging part, requiring not just accuracy but also quick decision-making and the ability to prioritize targets based on their threat level. The electronic targets began their programmed movements, simulating enemy combatants appearing and disappearing at various distances. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. She engaged each target in the optimal order, her modified rifle tracking smoothly from one to the next. The custom balance she had created allowed for faster target transitions without sacrificing stability. Every shot counted. Every target fell. The mechanical pop of the targets dropping echoed across the range, each sound a testament to her skill. The crowd had gone completely silent now, watching what was clearly an exceptional performance. Major. Thompson's expression had changed from curiosity to genuine interest. He had seen thousands of qualifications, but this was something different. This was a master at work, demonstrating what was possible when natural talent, intensive training, and intelligent equipment modification came together. The final buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the qualification course. Sarah cleared her weapon, engaged the safety, and stood up. She removed her hearing protection and turned to face the range master, who was reviewing the electronic scoring system. The grizzled sergeant looked at his screen, then looked again, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He had been running this range for 15 years and had never seen a perfect score on this particular course. Most experts considered a 95% score to be exceptional. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent range. "Perfect score. 100% accuracy, 40 for 40, with exceptional time on the rapid engagement segment. I've never seen that before on this course." A murmur ran through the crowd. Perfect score. The word seemed impossible, especially given the difficulty of the course and the fact that she had achieved it with a weapon that many present had dismissed as a gimmick. Sarah nodded politely to the range master. "Thank you, Sergeant." Her voice was calm, professional, showing neither pride nor vindication. She had simply done what she came to do. Lieutenant Parker felt heat rising to his face. His earlier comments suddenly felt incredibly stupid, and he was acutely aware that many people had heard him. Sergeant Torres looked at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The crowd began to break up, soldiers returning to their duties with plenty to talk about. Private Chen lingered, clearly wanting to say something but not sure if it was appropriate to approach a captain. Sarah noticed him and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, which seemed to be enough for the young soldier. Major Thompson approached the firing line, his stride purposeful. "Captain Mitchell, that was an impressive display." His tone was professional but carried genuine respect. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, beginning to pack up her gear. "Those modifications," Thompson continued, gesturing to her rifle, "are those your own designs?" "Yes, sir. I've been refining them for about 8 years now. Every adjustment is based on extensive testing and my own physical characteristics and shooting style." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to discuss this with you further. We have several soldiers who might benefit from understanding the principles behind effective weapon customization. Too many people either dismiss it entirely or do it without proper knowledge. You seem to have found a middle ground." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of a vehicle approaching drew everyone's attention. A black military SUV pulled up near the range entrance, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun. The vehicle came to a smooth stop and the driver quickly exited to open the rear passenger door. The insignia on the vehicle indicated high-ranking personnel, and immediately the atmosphere on the range shifted. Colonel Robert Harrison stepped out of the vehicle, his uniform crisp and decorated with ribbons that spoke of decades of distinguished service. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair cut in military precision and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him emerged Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Graves, the base's operations officer, and Captain David Chen, the colonel's aide. The range master immediately called attention, and every soldier present snapped to position. Major Thompson quickly approached to greet the colonel. clearly surprised by this unexpected visit. "At ease," Colonel Harrison said, his voice carrying authority without being harsh. "I heard there was quite a qualification happening this morning. I wanted to see for myself." Major Thompson glanced at Sarah, who stood at attention by her firing position. "Sir, Captain Mitchell just completed the advanced qualification course with a perfect score. First perfect score I've seen on this particular course." The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. Perfect score? On the advanced course? He looked toward Sarah, studying her for a moment before walking in her direction. The crowd of soldiers, which had started to disperse, now reassembled quickly, sensing something significant was about to happen. As the colonel approached, Sarah maintained her position at attention. Her rifle case was open beside her, the modified weapon clearly visible. Colonel Harrison's eyes went to the rifle first, taking in the various modifications with an experienced gaze. "Captain Mitchell," he said, stopping a few feet from her. "That's quite an unusual weapon you have there." "Yes, sir," Sarah responded, her voice steady and professional. The colonel walked closer, examining the rifle without touching it. He noted the custom grip, the modified stock, the specialized sighting system. His expression was unreadable and the tension in the air was palpable. Many of the soldiers watching felt a mix of emotions. Some wondered if Sarah was about to be reprimanded for using non-standard equipment, while others hoped the colonel would validate what they had just witnessed. Lieutenant Parker, still feeling the sting of embarrassment from his earlier comments, watched nervously. He suddenly worried that his mockery might have created a situation that would reflect poorly on his judgment, especially now that a colonel was involved. "I've been in the military for 33 years, Colonel Harrison said, his eyes still on the weapon. "I've seen a lot of soldiers try to modify their weapons. Most of them create expensive problems. They reduce reliability, throw off balance, and generally make the weapon worse than it was originally." Sarah remained at attention, saying nothing. The colonel's words could be leading anywhere, and she had learned long ago not to assume or interrupt when senior officers were speaking. "However," the colonel continued, straightening up to look directly at Sarah, "I've also encountered a very small number of soldiers who truly understand their weapons and themselves well enough to make meaningful improvements. Soldiers who don't just slap on accessories for appearance, but who carefully engineer solutions to specific challenges they've identified through years of experience." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The question is, which category do you fall into, Captain?" "Sir, every modification on this weapon serves a specific purpose," Sarah replied. "The custom grip accommodates my hand size and addresses a joint condition in my right wrist. The modified stock adjusts for my shoulder structure and provides better alignment with my natural sight line. The trigger has been carefully weighted to prevent overcorrection while maintaining safety standards. Each change has been tested extensively under various conditions." Colonel Harrison listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "And the sighting system? Enhanced acquisition speed while maintaining accuracy at distance, sir. The standard sights are excellent for most shooters, but after analyzing my performance patterns, I identified a consistent delay in my target acquisition time. This system addresses that specific issue." The colonel nodded slowly, processing this information. Lieutenant Colonel Graves had moved closer, clearly interested in the conversation. She was known for her analytical approach to training and equipment, and Sarah's methodical explanation had caught her attention. "I understand you just shot a perfect score," the colonel said. "That's impressive. But a single qualification, even a perfect one, doesn't necessarily prove that modifications are superior to standard configuration. Could be an exceptional day, favorable conditions, or simple luck." "Yes, sir, that's absolutely true," Sarah agreed. "I wouldn't suggest that my modifications are superior for everyone or even most soldiers. They're optimized specifically for me, for my physical characteristics and my identified weaknesses. What works for me might be completely wrong for someone else." This answer seemed to surprise the colonel slightly. He had expected defensiveness or an attempt to generalize her success. Instead, Sarah had acknowledged the limitations of her approach, which actually made her position stronger. "How long have you been working on these modifications?" he asked. 8 years, sir. Started with small adjustments during my second deployment. Tested extensively. Kept what worked. Discarded what didn't. It's been an iterative process, not a one-time customization." Major Thompson, standing nearby, interjected with permission. "Sir, if I may, Captain Mitchell's qualification scores over the past 5 years have been consistently in the top 1% of all personnel at every base she's been assigned to. This isn't a one-time achievement." Colonel Harrison absorbed this information, then looked back at Sarah's rifle. He seemed to be making a decision, weighing factors that weren't immediately obvious to the watching crowd. The soldiers observing the exchange stood in complete silence, aware they were witnessing something significant but not entirely sure what it meant. "Captain, with your permission, I'd like to examine your weapon more closely," the colonel said. "Of course, sir." Sarah carefully picked up the rifle, cleared it again to demonstrate it was safe, and handed it to the colonel. Harrison took the weapon with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had handled countless firearms throughout his career. He examined each modification carefully, checking the balance, testing the trigger weight, looking through the sights. His examination was thorough and knowledgeable, the assessment of an expert evaluating another expert's work. Lieutenant Parker watched this exchange with growing understanding. The colonel wasn't just looking at equipment. He was evaluating judgment, professionalism, and expertise. Every answer Sarah gave, every aspect of her approach, was being assessed at a much deeper level than simply whether the modifications worked. After several minutes of examination, Colonel Harrison handed the rifle back to Sarah. He was quiet for a moment, and everyone waited for his verdict. The morning sun had climbed higher and the temperature was rising, but no one seemed to notice the heat. All attention was focused on what the colonel would say next. Colonel Harrison turned away from Sarah to face the assembled soldiers, his expression serious. The change in his body language was subtle but significant, and those who had served long enough to read senior officers recognized that something important was about to happen. "I want everyone here to listen carefully," the colonel began, his voice carrying across the range with command presence, "because what I'm about to say is a lesson that extends far beyond this firing range and far beyond the topic of weapon modifications." The soldiers stood straighter, giving him their complete attention. Even those who had started to drift away stopped and turned back. Private Chen felt his heart beating faster, sensing the weight of the moment. "In the military, we rely on standards," Colonel Harrison continued. "Standard equipment, standard procedures, standard training. These standards exist for good reasons. They ensure baseline competency. They simplify logistics. They create common frameworks that allow units to work together effectively. Anyone who dismisses the value of these standards is a fool." Several soldiers nodded, including Lieutenant Parker, who felt a small measure of relief. Maybe the colonel was about to validate their earlier skepticism after all. However, the colonel's tone sharpened. There is a profound difference between respecting standards and being enslaved by them. There is a difference between following proven procedures and refusing to acknowledge that improvement is possible. Some of you need to learn this difference. Parker's relief evaporated. The colonel's gaze swept across the crowd, not settling on anyone in particular, but somehow making everyone feel addressed. "I've been informed that when Captain Mitchell arrived this morning with her customized weapon, she was met with mockery, with assumptions, with judgment from people who knew nothing about her experience, her expertise, or her reasoning." The colonel's voice remained controlled, but there was steel beneath it. "Some of you decided she was wrong before she ever fired a single shot." Sergeant Torres felt his stomach sink. The colonel might not know specifically who had made comments, but the message was clear and uncomfortable. "Let me tell you about Captain Sarah Mitchell," Colonel Harrison said, and there was something in his tone now that made everyone stand even more attentively. "Since some of you clearly didn't bother to find out who you were judging," he gestured to Sarah, who remained at attention. "Captain Mitchell served 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan between 2012 and 2018. During her second deployment, her unit came under sustained attack in a remote mountain position. Their designated marksman was killed in the opening minutes of the engagement. Captain Mitchell, then a lieutenant, took over that role." The colonel paused, letting the information settle. Over the next 6 hours, she provided covering fire that allowed her unit to hold their position until reinforcements arrived. 47 confirmed enemy combatants neutralized at distances ranging from 100 to 800 meters, under combat conditions with limited ammunition. Several soldiers exchanged glances, the significance of those numbers sinking in. That wasn't target practice. That was sustained, high-pressure combat marksmanship of the highest order. For her actions that day, she received the Silver Star. Colonel Harrison continued. She has also been awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Action Badge. She has served as a marksmanship instructor at 3 different bases, training over 2,000 soldiers in advanced shooting techniques. Private Chen's eyes widened. He had thought he was watching a competent soldier have a good day at the range. He had been watching a decorated war hero, an expert instructor, demonstrating a level of skill he hadn't even known was possible. Captain Mitchell holds the record for highest qualification score at Fort Benning, Fort Hood, and now apparently here at Fort Carson, the colonel added. She has been consulted by military equipment manufacturers on weapon design improvements. She has published papers in military journals about marksmanship training methodology. Each fact landed like a hammer blow on those who had been most vocal in their criticism. Parker felt physically sick. He had mocked a Silver Star recipient, someone whose combat experience and expertise vastly exceeded his own. Torres was staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. So when this soldier, with this background, with this level of expertise, makes careful modifications to her weapon based on 8 years of systematic testing and refinement, and then some of you mock her? The colonel's voice hardened. That tells me something very unflattering about your judgment, your professionalism, and your ability to recognize excellence when it's standing right in front of you. The silence on the range was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. This is the problem with assumption, Colonel Harrison continued. You saw something different, something that didn't match your limited understanding of how things should be, and you immediately assumed it was wrong. You didn't ask questions. You didn't consider that maybe, just maybe, someone with more experience and expertise than you might know something you don't. Lieutenant Colonel Graves nodded in agreement, her expression stern. She had undoubtedly dealt with similar assumptions throughout her own career. Being a woman in senior military leadership, I've spent 3 decades in the military, and I've learned a hard lesson, the colonel said, his tone becoming almost conversational, though no less serious. The most dangerous person in any unit isn't the one who makes mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The most dangerous person is the one who is so confident in their own knowledge that they cannot recognize expertise in others, especially when it comes in an unexpected package. He let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Some of you assumed Captain Mitchell was trying to show off, that she was playing with her weapon like a toy, that she valued appearance over function. You made these assumptions based on nothing but your own prejudices and limited understanding. Major Thompson, standing off to the side, found himself nodding. He had been around long enough to see this pattern repeated countless times. Expertise dismissed because it didn't look like what people expected expertise to look like. Here's what I saw when I examined Captain Mitchell's weapon, Colonel Harrison said. I saw intelligent design choices based on deep understanding of both the weapon system and the shooter's individual needs. I saw modifications that addressed specific identified issues rather than arbitrary changes. I saw the work of someone who has forgotten more about marksmanship than most of us will ever know. He turned to look directly at Sarah. Captain, you mentioned you wouldn't recommend your modifications for everyone. That shows wisdom. Real expertise isn't about imposing one-size-fits-all solutions. It's about understanding principles well enough to make intelligent choices based on specific circumstances. Yes, sir, Sarah responded. It was the first time she had spoken since the colonel began his address to the assembled soldiers. Colonel Harrison turned back to the crowd. Some of you are standing here right now feeling embarrassed, and you should be. But embarrassment is only valuable if it leads to growth, if it teaches you something important about your own limitations and biases. Parker felt like the colonel was speaking directly to him, even though the senior officer's gaze encompassed everyone equally. The lieutenant's face burned with shame, but beneath that shame was something else, a recognition that this was indeed a teaching moment, one he badly needed. Colonel Harrison took a step forward, his gaze sweeping across the assembled soldiers once more. His expression had softened slightly, but his intensity remained. What he was about to say clearly mattered deeply to him. I want to share something personal, he began, his voice taking on a different quality. 20 years ago, I was a captain, and I thought I knew everything about leadership and tactics. I was confident, decorated, and in my own mind, pretty much an expert on how things should be done. Several of the older soldiers exchanged knowing looks. They had heard the colonel tell stories before, and they knew that when he shared personal experiences, there was always a profound lesson attached. I was assigned a new platoon sergeant, Harrison continued. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. She was Puerto Rican, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she did things differently than any NCO I'd worked with before. She had her own methods for training, her own approach to discipline, her own way of organizing the platoon. The colonel paused, and something like regret crossed his face, and I fought her on everything. I assumed her different methods meant inferior methods. I questioned her decisions. I overruled her recommendations, and I generally made it clear that I didn't think she measured up to the standards I expected. Private Chen listened intently. This was not what he had expected from a colonel, this level of vulnerability and admission of past mistakes. For 6 months, I made that sergeant's life difficult, Harrison said. And then we deployed to Bosnia. 3 weeks into the deployment, our convoy was ambushed. It was chaos. Everything I thought I knew about command went out the window in about 30 seconds. The colonel's voice became quieter, and everyone leaned in slightly to hear. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez took control of the situation. Her different training methods meant her soldiers knew exactly what to do without being told. Her unusual approach to organization meant we had equipment positioned exactly where we needed it. Her non-standard communication style meant information flowed efficiently even in the middle of a firefight. He shook his head slowly, remembering. She saved lives that day, including probably mine. And after it was over, after we got back to base, I had to face a very uncomfortable truth. I had been wrong. Not just a little wrong, but fundamentally wrong about what competence looks like, about what expertise means, and about the value of different approaches. Lieutenant Colonel Graves was nodding. She clearly knew this story, and it evidently still carried weight with her. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez could have held that over me, Colonel Harrison continued. She could have made me look foolish, could have damaged my career, could have turned the platoon against me. Instead, she sat down with me and taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. He looked directly at Sarah as he spoke the next words. She told me that real strength isn't about always being right. It's about being willing to recognize when you're wrong and learning from it. She said the best leaders are those who can acknowledge expertise in others, even when it challenges their own assumptions. The colonel turned back to address the full group. I think about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez every time I encounter someone doing things differently than I expect. I ask myself, am I about to repeat my mistake? Am I letting my assumptions blind me to possible excellence? Sergeant Torres felt tears stinging his eyes. The colonel's story hit close to home because Torres had his own Staff Sergeant Rodriguez in his past, a soldier he had underestimated and later learned from. He realized now that he had failed to apply those lessons this morning. So here's what's going to happen, Colonel Harrison said, his tone shifting back to command mode. Captain Mitchell is going to be given a formal commendation for her perfect qualification score. That commendation will be entered into her permanent record, and I will personally sign it. Sarah's eyes widened slightly in surprise. She had expected acknowledgement, perhaps, but not a formal commendation. Furthermore, the colonel continued, I am assigning Captain Mitchell to develop a training program on advanced marksmanship principles and intelligent weapon customization. This program will be available to any soldier who wishes to improve their skills and understanding. It will not be mandatory because, as the captain correctly noted, not every modification works for every person, but the knowledge should be available to those who want to pursue excellence. Major Thompson smiled. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking decision that made Colonel Harrison an effective leader. Rather than simply defending standards or blindly embracing change, he was creating space for both structure and innovation. Major Thompson, the colonel addressed the training officer directly. You will work with Captain Mitchell to develop this program. I want it operational within 6 weeks. Use whatever resources you need. Yes, sir, Thompson responded immediately. Colonel Harrison then did something unexpected. He turned to face Sarah directly and came to attention. Captain Mitchell, for your continued excellence in marksmanship, for your dedication to the development of advanced combat skills, and for your representation of the highest standards of military professionalism, it is my honor to recognize your achievements. The watching soldiers suddenly understood what was about to happen. The colonel was not just acknowledging Sarah's skills informally. He was rendering honors. Everyone present, Colonel Harrison's voice rang out with command authority. Attention! The order was immediately obeyed. Every soldier on the range snapped to attention, including those who had been most critical earlier. Private Chen's heart was pounding. He had been in the military for less than a month, and he was witnessing something he instinctively knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Present arms, the colonel ordered. Those in uniform rendered salutes. The gesture was normally reserved for officers of higher rank or for significant ceremonial occasions. For a colonel to order salutes for a captain was highly unusual, a clear statement of exceptional respect and recognition. Sarah, surprised but professional, returned the salute. She stood there, a warrior who had been mocked just an hour ago, now receiving honors from a full colonel in front of dozens of witnesses. Lieutenant Parker raised his salute with a shaking hand. He had never felt so ashamed and so grateful at the same time. Ashamed of his earlier behavior, but grateful for the lesson he was learning. He knew he would never forget this moment, never forget the cost of arrogant assumptions. Order arms, Colonel Harrison commanded after a respectful interval. The salutes dropped, but everyone remained at attention. The colonel turned to address the assembled soldiers once more. Let this be a lesson to all of you. Excellence comes in many forms. Expertise doesn't always look the way you expect it to look. The moment you think you have everything figured out is the moment you stop growing, stop learning, and stop being effective. He paused, his gaze intense. In combat, assumptions get people killed. A soldier who assumes they know everything, who dismisses others without evidence, who judges based on prejudice rather than performance. That soldier is a liability. Don't be that soldier. Lieutenant Colonel Graves stepped forward. Captain Mitchell, the colonel and I would like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the training program in detail. Please report to headquarters at 1400 hours. Yes, ma'am, Sarah responded. Dismissed, Colonel Harrison said to the assembled soldiers. Think about what you witnessed here today. Think about what you learned. And most importantly, think about how you can be better tomorrow than you were this morning. The crowd began to disperse slowly, soldiers walking away in small groups, their conversations subdued and thoughtful. The atmosphere had completely transformed from the mocking energy of earlier in the morning. Now there was reflection, discomfort, and for many a sense of having witnessed something significant. Private Chen approached Sarah hesitantly as she packed up her equipment. He waited respectfully until she noticed him, then came to attention. Captain Mitchell, ma'am, I just wanted to say, what you did today was amazing. I've only been in the Army for 3 weeks, and I've already learned an important lesson because of you. Sarah looked at the young soldier, recognizing the genuine sincerity in his eyes. What lesson is that, Private? Never judge someone before you see what they can do, ma'am. And that real skill comes from years of hard work and learning, not just from following what everyone else does. He paused, then added, I hope someday I can be half as good as you are. Sarah's expression softened. You will be if you stay dedicated and always keep learning. The fact that you're thinking about these things after just 3 weeks tells me you're going to do well in the Army. Chen beamed at the compliment, saluted, and hurried off to join his unit. Sarah watched him go, remembering when she had been that young and eager, just starting her military journey. Major Thompson approached next, a folder tucked under his arm. Captain, that was quite a morning. I have to admit, when I first heard about the commotion at the range, I wasn't sure what I was going to find. I'm used to skepticism, sir, Sarah replied. It comes with doing things differently. I imagine it does, Thompson agreed. But I also imagine it gets tiring, having to prove yourself over and over again. Sarah considered this. Sometimes. But I also understand where the skepticism comes from. There are a lot of people who make modifications without really understanding what they're doing. People see those failures and then assume all customization is bad. It's not an unreasonable reaction, even if it's frustrating to deal with. Thompson nodded appreciatively. That's a mature perspective. Many people in your position would be more bitter about it. Bitterness doesn't improve my shooting, Sarah said with a slight smile. Across the range, Lieutenant Parker and Sergeant Torres sat on a bench, both men looking dejected. They had been talking for the past 10 minutes, processing what had happened and their role in it. I feel like an idiot, Parker said, his head in his hands. I was so confident, so sure that I was right. And I wasn't just wrong. I was wrong about someone who's basically a legend, a Silver Star recipient. How did I not know who she was? Torres shook his head. I knew her name sounded familiar, but I didn't make the connection. And even if I hadn't heard of her before, that doesn't excuse anything. We judged her without any basis except our own prejudices. The worst part, Parker continued, is that I've been in situations where people underestimated me. I know what that feels like. And I turned around and did the exact same thing to someone else. Torres was quiet for a moment, then said, You heard what the colonel said, though. Embarrassment is only valuable if it leads to growth. So the question is, what are we going to do differently from now on? Parker looked up. You're right. We can't change what we did this morning, but we can change how we act going forward. He paused, then added, I think I need to apologize to Captain Mitchell. Face to face, Torres nodded. Yeah, I think I do too. She deserves that. Even if it's uncomfortable for us. The two men stood and walked toward where Sarah was finishing her equipment check. They approached respectfully, coming to attention when they were a few feet away. Captain Mitchell, Parker began, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort. I owe you an apology. This morning I made inappropriate and disrespectful comments about you and your weapon. I had no basis for those comments except my own ignorance and arrogance. I was wrong and I'm sorry. Torres spoke next. Ma'am, I was equally disrespectful. I made assumptions about your abilities and your professionalism, without any knowledge of who you are or what you've accomplished. It was wrong and I apologize. Sarah studied both men for a moment. She could see genuine remorse in their expressions. Not just embarrassment at being caught or fear of consequences, but actual understanding of why their behavior had been wrong. I appreciate your apologies, she said, and I accept them. But I want you both to understand something. I'm not angry about what happened this morning. Disappointed maybe, but not angry. Both men looked surprised. Parker had expected coldness, possibly even a sharp reprimand. The reason I'm not angry, Sarah continued, is because this happens all the time, and not just to me. It happens to anyone who does things differently, who challenges conventions, who doesn't fit into neat categories. Getting angry about it just wastes energy. She paused, making sure they were both paying attention. What matters is what you do next. Are you going to remember this feeling the next time you encounter something or someone unexpected? Are you going to pause and ask questions instead of rushing to judgment? That's what will determine whether today was just embarrassing or actually valuable. Yes, ma'am. Both men replied in unison. Good, Sarah said. Then we're fine. Learn from it and move forward. Torres hesitated, then asked, Ma'am, when you developed that training program the colonel mentioned, would it be possible for us to attend? Even after this morning, Sarah smiled, a genuine expression of approval, especially after this morning. The program is going to be for anyone who wants to improve their skills and understanding. That includes people who start from a place of skepticism. Some of the best students I've ever had were initially my biggest critics. Both men looked relieved and grateful. They saluted and Sarah returned it. As they walked away, Parker said quietly to Torres, She's a better person than I am. If someone had treated me the way we treated her, I don't think I'd be that understanding. Yeah, Torres agreed, which is exactly why she's a captain with a Silver Star. And we're still trying to figure out basic leadership. Meanwhile, back at the headquarters building, Colonel Harrison sat in his office with Lieutenant Colonel Graves, discussing the morning's events. That was quite a speech you gave, Robert, Graves said. Personal, vulnerable, and exactly what those soldiers needed to hear. Harrison leaned back in his chair. I meant every word. The story about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I don't share that one often, but it felt right today. It was effective, Graves confirmed. I saw the impact on those faces. Several of them looked like they'd been hit with cold water. Good, Harrison replied. Sometimes people need to be shaken out of their comfortable assumptions. This base has gotten complacent in some ways. We follow procedures, we meet standards, but we've lost some of that drive for excellence, that willingness to innovate. Graves nodded. Captain Mitchell's training program could help address that. If she can teach even a fraction of what she knows about marksmanship and the principles behind effective customization, it could raise the overall skill level significantly. More than that, Harrison said, it sends a message about the kind of culture we want to build here. A culture that respects expertise, that values innovation within the framework of discipline, that recognizes excellence even when it comes in unexpected packages. He picked up a folder from his desk. I've been reviewing Captain Mitchell's file. Her record is extraordinary. But what strikes me most is the pattern. At every assignment, she's improved training programs, mentored younger soldiers, and pushed for evidence-based approaches to skill development. She's exactly the kind of officer we need in leadership positions. Graves raised an eyebrow. Are you thinking about a promotion recommendation? I'm thinking about several things, Harrison replied. But first, let's see how she handles developing this training program. If it's as good as I think it will be, then yes, we should be looking at how to give her greater scope and responsibility. 6 weeks later, the first session of Captain Mitchell's Advanced Marksmanship and Weapon Optimization course took place in a classroom near the main training center. 30 soldiers had signed up for the initial offering, a mix of ranks from private to senior NCOs. Among them were Lieutenant Parker, Sergeant Torres, and Private Chen. Sarah stood at the front of the classroom, a presentation screen behind her showing detailed diagrams of weapon mechanics. On a table beside her lay several rifles, each demonstrating different types of modifications, from simple to complex. Welcome to the course, she began. Before we talk about anything technical, I want to establish the foundation of what we're going to learn. This program is not about making your weapon look cool. It's not about copying what I do or what anyone else does. It's about understanding principles well enough to make intelligent decisions based on your specific needs and circumstances. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a simple equation. Performance equals skill plus equipment minus interference. Every shooter has natural abilities and learned skills, Sarah explained. The equipment you use should enhance those abilities, not fight against them. Interference is anything that prevents you from performing at your best. Physical discomfort, equipment that doesn't fit properly, sights that don't align with your natural sight picture, and so on. Private Chen took notes furiously, determined to absorb every bit of information. Around him, other soldiers listened with focused attention. The atmosphere in the room was respectful and engaged, vastly different from the mockery of 6 weeks ago. The first step isn't modification, Sarah continued. It's assessment. You need to understand your own shooting patterns, your strengths and weaknesses, before you can make meaningful changes. Over the next few weeks, we're going to help each of you conduct that assessment. For the next 2 hours, she walked them through the fundamentals of shooting mechanics, the biomechanics of how different body types interact with weapons, and the basic principles of equipment design. It was technical material, but she presented it in a way that was accessible and practical, always connecting theory back to real-world application. Lieutenant Parker found himself genuinely impressed. This wasn't just someone who could shoot well. This was an educator who had deeply thought about how to transfer knowledge to others. He realized that his initial dismissal of Sarah had prevented him from recognizing teaching skill that exceeded his own by a significant margin. During a break, Sergeant Torres approached Sarah with a question. Ma'am, I've been analyzing my shooting patterns like you suggested. I noticed that I consistently pull slightly left on targets beyond 300 yards, but only in prone position. Do you have any thoughts on what might cause that? Sarah smiled, pleased by the thoughtful question. Several possible factors. Could be your breathing pattern in prone, could be how you're loading your support hand, could even be a minor vision dominance issue that only shows up at distance. Let's schedule some one-on-one range time and we'll diagnose it properly. Torres nodded gratefully. This was what he had been hoping for. Not just generic instruction, but personalized guidance based on his specific challenges. Thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate this opportunity. As the course progressed over the following weeks, word spread through the base about its quality. Soldiers who had been skeptical about attending began asking if there would be future sessions. The waiting list for the next course grew to over 60 names. Major Thompson observed several of the sessions, impressed by both the content and Sarah's teaching approach. He reported back to Colonel Harrison regularly on the program's success. The best part, Thompson told the colonel during one meeting, is that she's not just teaching marksmanship. She's teaching critical thinking, systematic analysis, and evidence-based decision-making. Those skills transfer to everything else these soldiers will do in their careers. Harrison nodded with satisfaction. That's exactly what I hoped for. This base needed something like this, someone who could challenge people to think more deeply about their profession. 3 months after the incident at the firing range, Colonel Harrison called Sarah to his office. She arrived promptly at the scheduled time, wondering what the meeting was about. She had submitted her final report on the training program the previous week, and the feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. "Captain Mitchell, have a seat," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. His tone was formal, which usually meant official business. Sarah sat, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Sir, I've been reviewing the results of your training program," the colonel began. "The improvement in qualification scores among participants has been statistically significant. More importantly, we're seeing improved critical thinking and problem-solving across the board." "I'm glad to hear it, sir," Sarah replied. Harrison leaned forward slightly. "I'm recommending you for promotion to major. Additionally, I'm recommending you for assignment to the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Moore, where your expertise can influence training at the institutional level. These recommendations will have my strongest endorsement." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. The Army Marksmanship Unit was one of the most prestigious assignments a soldier in her field could receive. To be recommended by a colonel carried significant weight. "Sir, I'm honored," she said, genuine emotion in her voice. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll continue doing what you've been doing," Harrison replied with a slight smile. "The Army needs more officers like you. Officers who respect tradition while also pushing for improvement. Officers who can teach and inspire others. Officers who understand that excellence isn't about following every convention, but about understanding principles well enough to make intelligent choices." He paused, then added, "What happened at the range 3 months ago was unfortunate, but the way you handled it, the way you turned it into a teaching opportunity for everyone involved, showed me exactly the kind of leader you are." Sarah nodded, accepting the compliment. "Thank you, sir. I've learned that how you respond to disrespect says more about your character than the disrespect itself." "Wise words," Harrison agreed. "Now the promotion board won't meet for another 2 months, and the assignment process will take additional time. But I wanted you to know that this is coming, and that you've earned it through excellence and professionalism." As Sarah left the colonel's office, she walked past the building where her training program classes were held. Through the window, she could see the next session in progress, led by one of the senior instructors she had trained to continue the program. Inside, soldiers were engaged in the same kind of critical analysis and skill development that had transformed the first group. Lieutenant Parker, who was assisting with the instruction as part of his own development, saw her walk past and waved. She waved back, thinking about how much had changed in just 3 months. A man who had mocked her was now one of her most dedicated students, teaching others the very principles he had initially dismissed. That evening, Sarah returned to her quarters and opened her laptop. She had started writing a paper on teaching methodology for marksmanship instruction, building on the lessons learned from the training program. As she worked, she thought about Private Chen, about Lieutenant Parker and Sergeant Torres, about all the soldiers who had started from a place of skepticism and grown into dedicated students. She also thought about Colonel Harrison and his story about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, about how one moment of recognition and respect had rippled forward through decades, eventually leading to him creating opportunities for another soldier who worked outside conventional expectations. Sarah understood now that what had happened at the firing range wasn't just about proving her skills. It was about creating a moment that would influence how dozens of soldiers thought about expertise, about judgment, about the difference between standards and rigidity. Those soldiers would carry those lessons forward in their careers, perhaps creating similar moments for others. The next morning, Sarah received an email from Private Chen. He had just completed his first advanced qualification and scored in the top 10% of his unit. His message was brief but heartfelt. "Thank you for teaching me that excellence isn't about following the crowd. It's about understanding principles and working hard every single day." Sarah smiled as she read it, then filed the message in a folder she kept of meaningful communications from students. She had dozens of similar messages, each one a reminder of why she had spent 8 years refining her techniques, why she endured skepticism and mockery, why she worked to pass on her knowledge to others. As she prepared for another day of training and instruction, Sarah reflected on what the incident at the range had ultimately meant. It hadn't been about her customized weapon, not really. It had been about the broader question of how organizations recognize and nurture excellence, especially when that excellence doesn't fit conventional molds. The military, like any large organization, needed standards and conventions, but it also needed people who understood those standards well enough to know when and how to transcend them. It needed leaders who could recognize expertise in unexpected forms, and it needed a culture where hard work and genuine skill were valued more than